So I'll get the Wii Sports music.
Okay.
I'll have that intro play.
Okay.
The Tyburn Crest show first.
Okay.
All right, welcome to the Crusader Corners podcast. I'm your host, Principal O'Donnell. And in the Crusader Corners podcast, this is our first episode. What we will be doing is exploring different topics in education. Sometimes we'll go national and sometimes we'll go local. Today's conversation is a semi-local, semi-national topic, as we have here with us Principal Fallon from St. Albert the Great Academy. So we will be talking about classical education and specifically how classical education is available in Auburn, New York for grades pre-K through 12. So today's guest of honor, this is Ann Fallon. She's a mother of 8. She is the former board president of Tyburn Academy, as well as a former teacher here. And she currently serves as the outgoing principal of St. Albert the Great Academy. They serve grades pre-K through 6. 7 of Ann's children have graduated from Tyburn Academy, and her 8th child is currently a junior. All right, so Ann, is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself?
Just that you're right. I think Matt and I have had kids here for 16 years.
Okay. It's a lot of tuition over the years.
That's a lot of tuition. Yes, it is. But obviously we've been, pleased and recall way back when Tyburn was just a conversation around the dining room table. Made the decision to move back and live in Auburn so our kids could go to school here. So next year will be our last year, and it's bittersweet.
Yeah. So wait, where were you guys living prior to moving back?
So we were living here, but we briefly moved. Matt got a job. We moved to Massachusetts for a little bit, came back, and when we were discerning where we wanted to live, that was an important thing, right? Knowing that, our kids were still young, but what school we wanted them to go to was going to make a difference. And so, we were looking in the Syracuse area and Auburn, and really and truly we chose Auburn because we knew that Tyburn would be here for them.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Awesome. So how did you get involved in classical education?
So by accident, because when we had moved, things had changed. Matt's job had changed, and we were facing moving back here. And like I said, we didn't know where we were going to live. I got thrown into homeschooling for a stint, not expecting to do that, but did it temporarily. And then once I started, I didn't stop. I didn't stop until the kids were old enough to come here in middle school, 7th, 8th grade. And during that time of homeschooling, what I realized was that the education that I had growing up and the education I wanted my children to have was something, they were very different. Yeah. And so in that, homeschooling was really a gift, even though it was out of necessity at the time, because I just followed my kids and I followed what they loved, how they loved to learn. And, there's so many resources for homeschooling today. And so I just fell into classical education without even knowing what it was called.
Okay, right.
So
what is classical education?
So I would say, and so then, fast forward so many years, I end up at St. Albert the Great Academy, and knew what kind of education should be there, and knew that a classical approach was the right, because I believe that an authentic Catholic school has a classical approach to its curriculum and to its way. So it's, some people, will say, well, what is classical? And they get hung up on terminology and the technical side of it. And I really believe that it's It's the approach to the human and naturally the way the child learns. It appeals to their natural senses. It appeals to their natural development of skills at a very young age. And then up at the higher grades, like here, it just strengthens the skills they need to be lifelong learners,
Mm-hmm.
to be independent thinkers, good decision makers, and live a good life, make good choices to live a good life, and not be bound around what someone told them, who they were supposed to be, what they were good at, what they weren't good at, or anything else. So it is about a freedom, which is why a lot of times classical education is called a Catholic liberal education
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as well, because it does I think the greatest gift it gives, and I can say this, I have 8 kids and 7 of them here graduated here, and they were all very different. But the greatest gift it gave them was the gift to be who they are.
Yeah.
And all go in different directions. They were all at different academic levels, but they all did very well here because they were respected for who they were and free to be who they were and free to discover who they were and graduate and go in different directions. So
Yeah. Well, you said they discovered who they were, and I feel like in um, in a school setting where God is not part of the picture,
right,
no one can ever really discover who they are, because like every human being has a longing to find out what is their purpose in life, why do they exist,
how they got
is
here.
there right and wrong, what's my duty
Mm-hmm.
towards the good. And like you were also saying, kind of connecting this back to, you said that any Catholic education is also classical, because our faith prompts us to ask those questions,
Mm-hmm.
and take them seriously, and then also gives us the answer to them
Right,
that you then get to wrestle with your entire rest of your life.
right.
Um, so
But
yeah, I
knowledge
think that
does
is,
too. I mean,
yeah.
knowledge, right? The study of science always points back to the creator. The
Mhm.
study of math, right? I mean, everything points to God. If it doesn't, then it is confusing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I feel bad for kids who, it's part of being human, is trying to find out some purpose in
Right.
your life, right? And when one of the enduring questions that humanity's always had is, does God exist? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot written on that topic, right? And in the Catholic school and a classical school, you don't shy away from that, right? Whether it's arguments against his existence or arguments for his existence, and looking at philosophically.
Right.
But like the 5 ways, St. Thomas's 5 ways are pretty solid proofs for God's existence, right?
Right.
And so the fact that like in a public setting, you couldn't really teach that in the like you just couldn't teach it, right? Because you would be leading students, or having to be definitively like, it concludes here that yeah, God exists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's outlawed,
Mm-hmm.
which I understand the reason why religion isn't mixed in education, but and it's because education is part of the state, right? So maybe it raises a bigger question: if you should keep the state separate from having say a state religion, and that affects the education, maybe the state then really shouldn't be too involved in the education, because it can never really free
It can't
the
free the
individual's
human.
mind or answer their questions that they have.
Well, the state, I mean, a state education, the goal at the end of the state education is to serve the state, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it has a very utilitarian approach to the education of a person and of a child,
Yeah,
right? Are
yeah,
you going to be useful citizen, right? Where
yeah. I don't even know if I don't know
how
if
are
I
you
give
going
it
to
that
use,
much credit. So like they
right?
are pretty explicit that they're trying to prepare workers for the 21st century, right? And that's the end goal of the
Mm-hmm.
state education system. They're not even looking for useful citizens, because they're looking to develop global citizens, which
Today, yes, they are.
I think is just an oxymoronic term, because you're a citizen of a country, not the globe. So like, if only they were looking to form good citizens for the country as a goal, but it's not even the goal.
No, it's again for them. So the
Yeah.
goal is for them to form useful citizens for the state, right? To give back to the state, to perpetuate the state, to it's a whole circle. Their own circle of life exists for different reasons, where a different approach, a classical approach, or even a religious approach, is the end is for the good of the person, the individual person. So state education is more about, let's make everybody the same. The common good is for everybody to move towards the center and be the same, and the outliers, well, some win and some lose.
Mm-hmm.
Where the goal of a classical education is that every human achieves to the best of their ability. They achieve greatness because within the way God intended them to
Right.
be.
And the best of their ability beyond just the economics of it.
Right.
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 Because playing devil's
Yeah.
advocate, I'm sure they would say, no, we do want people to get to their best of their ability and recognize different ability levels. But it is utilitarian. It has an
Right.
economic end. And you see that a lot with parents when they're talking to their kids about college, right? And
Mm-hmm.
most kids have drilled into their head just by the zeitgeist, I guess, that why do you go to college? To get a
Mm-hmm.
good job.
Did a good job.
And yeah, that's not the end of a true education, which is supposed to actually, you said Catholic liberal education. Liberal mean free, it frees your mind
Mm-hmm.
to then go live a good life, right? There's plenty of people with great jobs who don't live good lives.
Right. And that doesn't work today
Yeah.
because education is very expensive. And a lot of kids graduate from high school and they don't know what they want to do. And so, and the workforce has changed. What's needed in society is very different today.
Yeah, that's the biggest
So,
irony. There was a, like 5 years ago, everyone was talking about how coding jobs will be everywhere, and now they think AI is going to change that.
right,
So you can't really prepare people for 21st century jobs because the economy changes every 10 years.
right.
They
And
say
you,
technology doubles every like 7 at this point, so it's only accelerating.
right. And at
But you
some
can,
point you're going to saturate
yeah,
certain areas. I mean, you can only handle so many, IT directors.
yeah. But the economy changes, human nature is constant,
Yes.
right? Like the definition of virtue and being a virtuous person and producing happiness in your life, that is the same 2,000 years ago. It's the same
Right.
today, the same standards.
Right. And the struggles of the human today are the struggles of the human of yesterday, and then before that, and before that, and before that. So to prepare a child for life prepares them to work through those struggles, work through the joys, work through the sorrows, because undoubtedly you're going to have them.
Yeah, yeah,
And so to teach them virtue, to teach them, how to weather the storm, how to share the joys, how to be charitable, how to love your neighbor, all that kind of things, stuff is really important, no matter what profession you're in.
mhm.
Again, and the other key too, I think that classical education is never forgotten is the family, right? And of course, if you're going to, be teaching the faith, you're going to rely on the family, but that's another key ingredient to this type of education is the involvement of the family.
Yeah.
The family is very important, and there's a recognition that the parent is the primary educator. And people say, "Oh, well, I'm not an educator. Can't teach my child," but you are, because you're the first example. You're the first witness to all of the virtues, and to be disregarded in the education of your child is an injustice to you, the
Yeah.
parent, to the family unit, and to the child.
Well, even like us, so there's a literacy crisis in our country, right?
Right.
And I don't necessarily put 100% of that on the schools. Like any
No.
problem, it's going to be multifaceted with what issues are. But I know, like in families that don't make a habit of reading, or if kids come from families where the parents don't read, even the basics of owning a bookshelf,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether a family owns a bookshelf
Mm-hmm.
is going to affect that child's development and their worldview and their attitude towards reading, because whether it's not going to be available to them or not. So I think when we talk about parents being the primary educators, like everything a parent does is training their kids.
Yes.
Whether it's teach them how to like dress themselves, toilet training, spending time with them singing songs, like
Eating dinner
everything you do.
together
Yeah, eating dinner together.
and reading. I mean, reading to a young child is probably one of the most important things in their development, their academic development.
Yeah.
Um,
In terms of a kid learning to read, do you think
yeah.
what percentage of that responsibility is on the school versus, parent and school?
Well, obviously, parents send kids to school to teach them how to read, to teach them how to learn math, right?
Mm-hmm.
The foundation begins at home, like reading, just a recognition of learning, like of wonder, of discovery. Do you ask your child questions? Do you find out what they learned at home? Do you show them if you're, I don't know, if you're cooking something, do you show them, oh, I'm cooking this and this is the recipe and want to do it with me?
Yeah.
Things like that. So it's that active engagement of parents doing things together instead of dividing and conquering. We always divide. Well, this child is going here and this child is going here, and I have my thing that I need to do. There should be less of that and more of the whole unit doing things together. But the school has an obligation. Absolutely. That's the school's job, is to, in a more systematic way, in a more disciplined way, to train the child, to give the child, to train the child in disciplines of study habit or how to learn. Or even today, the youngest child, helping through weaknesses,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
spend a lot of time, looking at all these young children and saying, okay, this child has a weakness in processing. This child has a weakness in speech development, right? And it's working with parents, and parents have to work together so that we can strengthen those weaknesses at a young age so that, they're not trying to overcome hurdles, or form bad habits or anything like that. So the school's role is definitely a more disciplined, technical role. But they should be taking the lessons of, charity within the home and bringing it to the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's also, geez, I was watching a movie and there was it was Hollywood, so it's fake anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it was supposed to be something was happening in the 40s or 50s. And it was one teacher and she had 30 like sixth grade kids
Mm.
all paying attention to her. And that's was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I know this is a fake movie. But at the same time, it does seem that people talk about changing kid behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
different cultural expectations, I guess, coming in. And that those come from the family, right?
They come from the family. It comes from setting the environment.
Mm-hmm.
When you walk into this school, Tyburn, or you walk into St. Albert's, it's distinctly different. And I have parents tell me that all the time. They walk in, they're like, wow, this is really different. It's distinctly different, and it's intentionally different.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
feel like you're walking into an institution, right? So it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't, people, greet you differently. They speak to you differently.
I always get
It's a
comments that it's
very
really
different
quiet.
culture. Very quiet.
Very
Same
quiet.
here. People
Yeah.
walk into our preschool room and they're like, I cannot believe this. What did you just do? How did you get these kids like this? Well, they're busy.
Mm-hmm.
They're comfortable. They know that they're, supported. They know that if there's a problem, it's going to be taken care of. They're, and they're given works and things to do that are age appropriate for them, for their minds to be full.
So they're engaged. Yeah.
They're enriched. They're engaged.
Yeah. I
They're
guess
not
like
bored.
that's another example, like classroom behavior, reading. It's definitely the school's responsibility, and there's ways the school can screw that up.
Yeah.
But you can do it very well
Right.
as a school. But there's a dance there as well with the parents. Whether it's classroom behavior and expectations. You can, you need like the majority of the kids on board coming in at they
You
need
do.
to.
You need parents that, like I'm a great example, right? I didn't have a classical education, but I want my child to have this type of education. Therefore, I am willing to support the school and what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
instead of, working against. And likewise, one thing that I was always so thankful for Tyburn about is that you were not working against me. You were not undoing what we were doing at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with faith. And that has to do, with virtue. And
Yeah.
maybe sometimes it was a different perspective or a different opinion or whatever, but it still never worked against me as a parent. And I think that's the key. Even parents that are in these schools, families that aren't Catholic, it's not a requirement.
Right. Yeah, we got a lot of non-Catholics here.
You know what I mean? But you have to want what your child will benefit from the culture because it's Catholic. And you have to want that and accept that.
Right. Well, so it's a bit of an apologetical topic where the truth, if you're living in truth, it produces harmony in the community, right? So, the Christian ethics produces a happy community. Mm-hmm. So you can participate in that, and to the extent that your ethics or the kids buys into loving your neighbor, trying to live in charity on a natural level, they can then also contribute to the community, which then begs the question of maybe there's something to this whole religion thing. If your family doesn't have any religious background, right? But it by its fruit. Look at the product.
Yes.
A happy life.
Yes. And if you look at the public education system, they're always trying to recreate what is good, make it in the guise of we're going to make it better. Mm-hmm. Well, if something is really good, it doesn't need to be changed to make it better. It just needs to be consistent and persistent. And, so if you don't teach virtue, you teach something and you call it something else. So mm-hmm. They're constantly changing the name of, whether it's pay it forward. Okay, what's pay it forward? It's charity, is part of it. So if you're trying to rename it and change it to be inclusive, you're just spinning your wheels in mud, because at the end of the day, if you approach the human person with all humans are dignified because they're all created equal in God's eyes, that's inclusive.
Yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, that's so in the irony of it is, I think that in our society, we do too much dividing. No, we're all one first, and then we're different.
Can I ask you a very controversial question? I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah.
When looking at a school, what would you say should be a higher priority for parents to look at? Sports?
Right, I love this question.
Or curriculum and school culture.
Culture by far. And I've talked about this for years since I've been in education, and this is always a hot topic. And I've had, all my kids, all the parents and their friends, people make different decisions based on, well, my child, wants this and my child wants that, and Tyburn doesn't have this, and, or might not have that. All my children here, they all took, all different levels of courses. Some of them took Regents courses. Some of them took non-Regents courses. They all played sports. They all participated in the choir or the band. They all participated in plays. They all participated in dances, the prom. And so, people will say, well, there's not enough. And this is a controversial topic. However, my thing about the sports is, when my child is on, I knew none of my children were going to be, pro basketball players.
Yeah. Maybe like a 6'9" one snuck in there, you might have
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. But I was pretty sure that none of them had that talent. So when my child was on the basketball court and it was an overtime game and it was a last second basket at the buzzer where they won or lost, or if my child was up on stage, performing, their experience, their excitement, their nervousness, whatever they experienced is the same of any child on any stage.
Mm-hmm.
The difference, it's the same of any child on any basketball court.
It's the same lesson you get out of it. Like your leadership, willingness to learn to accept the loss, I guess. The camaraderie, right? Well, you think about the benefits of the sports. Like we have sports here, and because it does serve a purpose. But yeah, I mean, like we don't have 12 different sports.
No, we don't. But again, the experiences that they had were the same experiences that they would have anywhere else at any other school that any other child has. The difference, I think, is on the parents.
Mm-hmm.
What gym am I sitting in? What stadium am I sitting in? What what pennant is going on the wall? And all those things.
I'd argue you get even fewer experiences because when you have to get to a degree of specialty to maintain a position, on a very competitive, large school sports team. The point where you don't have that option to then be in the choir or to be in the musical.
Right, you have to choose
be dedicated 24/7. Whereas here you are able to develop yourself in a more well-rounded way. And we've had students be successful in their sports. Some D1 athletes.
Oh my gosh, I had one.
You can find success in the small environment. It just might be I have a relative who calls it the dog syndrome, delusions of grandeur. Right. That you think your kid is destined for it, so you're going to push them to the.
But you're right. I mean, we know there's been kids here who have left here and gone and walked on teams.
Yeah.
I mean, I have one. Louisa did that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, again, so if you go back to like what's the most important, culture is the most important. How my child is my child being respected? Are you having conversations with me when something goes wrong, when something goes right? And that's the thing that I least understand about those that choose a public setting and then hate it. Well, but they wanted to play sports or they wanted to do this, but your child deserves better. And that time is so short. You can't take it back.
Yeah.
I don't want my child to go to school and be afraid.
Well, yeah.
Or to be.
So just think from like a Catholic perspective, just like who is responsible for forming the intellect of my child?
Mm-hmm.
And if that person thinks some pretty weird things, then I'm not going to really, and by weird things like transgenderism, pretty unpopular now. It's not as like edgy to say that, that kind of nonsense is as weird as it might have been like 2 years ago. But like if someone bought into that ideology and was teaching the history class or the English class, where they were like okay with it and they hadn't really like exercised their logic side of their brain too hard, evidently, by adopting that like idea. I just think there's someone better out there who can help the formation of my child's intellect,
There is something better and they deserve better. So you could say, well, my child, we have faith at home, we do this, they can work through it. Well, they're there 7 hours every day.
Yeah, how much time are they wasting? Like having to play defense instead of actually playing offense, in the sense that like, okay, you're learning what not to think from this person, but there's so much truth, goodness, and beauty out there to learn that you're spending your time like learning how to deal with temporary nonsense, right? Because it's going to be a fad. Like even in 20 years, will this information be that important?
Yeah, but it is content too. I mean, that's where we've gotten now. I think there's a bigger difference, not just culturally, but academically, in the content and what they're learning and in the way they're learning.
Yeah.
I mean, Common Core math was, and now it's called something else.
Yeah.
And they'll change the name to something else. Yeah. Was an experiment that didn't work, that impacted the child the most in a detrimental way. It didn't work
I think also like that's a good example of this state not thinking from the perspective of the parent being the primary educator.
Right.
Because I think the biggest complaint about Common Core was that the kid who normally gets help at home from mom or dad with homework looks at it and the parent has no idea what's going on. And so you have that disconnect between the parent and the school. And that's probably why it like had its biggest fumble.
Well, but I'll say being on the elementary level and seeing kids when St. Albert's opened, seeing them come in from different schools, because when the school opened, we had kids that came from, public schools, they came from St. Joe's, they came from homeschooled, and they also came from a very evolving math curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And I studied it. I looked at the Common Core math books and I looked at, what we use, and I understood what they were trying to do, but what it did not do is it did not honor the natural development of the youngest child.
Mm-hmm.
So it had expectations placed on them for learning in first and second grade that is not natural to the child.
Yeah, so my kid's into math.
Yeah.
And so sometimes her grandparents bring home like math textbooks and she's doing the second grade one.
Yeah.
And it's asking her questions to identify the array. I'm like, my kid knows what an array is, but my kid's kind of unique, like in a certain position with math.
Right.
I didn't know what an array was when I was in second grade, or just asking the question from that vocab. So it's like it's a good idea to give it the credit. I guess it's like, okay, great, we're trying to expand the kid's vocabulary. At the same time, though, the development stage of the child is, do your kids learn their math facts?
Right. So
because
that was
they're coming up to high school not knowing their
they're
math
not.
facts.
Well, they were coming to fifth grade and they couldn't do long division because they didn't know 6 times 4 is 24 in their sleep.
But they might know something about dots.
But they might know something else.
Yeah.
So it didn't make, we were finding, well, we can take the third grade book, part 1, part 2, and flip it. And I'm like, wait a minute, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. So that's the other thing about public education is you're constantly following trends. Unfortunately, trends come from a person, right? Which is then connected to a research.
Right. It's connected to research, which someone has to produce because they have to
get a publishing company.
The research has to be funded. You have to do research to justify your existence. So there's going to be a cycle of trends.
I mean, teaching math doesn't change. 2 + 2 does not change. When the child needs to know it, doesn't change. Mm-hmm. So, does it mean we sit back and don't pay attention to anything? No, that's not true at all. But why change something that works for the child? And why not give them, like your daughter, the array? Why not give, this is the other thing too, like if you look backwards, I'm always at St. Albert's looking forwards and looking backwards, and then looking up here. What do you want the child to know when they leave in 6th grade? Well, you trace it back. What do you want the child to know in preschool going into kindergarten? It doesn't have to be that difficult. And if you give them more enriching work, here's a plug for St. Albert's.
Yeah.
Our preschool's a Montessori preschool. They do geometry and learn geometric concepts that 4th graders and 5th graders wouldn't know. But they're not taught, they're taught very differently, and so they're taught geometric shapes that, again, I don't think I could walk up and name all of them. Yeah. And they're not just taught how they look, they're taught, they feel them, they touch them. So they understand, them all the way around. They put them in a bag and they feel them with their hands, without seeing them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So what they're gaining, they don't even understand until they get to that point, and then geometry is not so foreign to them.
Have you heard of those Picasso tiles?
Yes.
Yeah. Those are pretty cool.
Those are cool.
Because with when we play with them, I play with them with Mary Grace. You can see it's an equilateral triangle.
Yeah.
And you got your squares, right? And you just can see how the different pieces come together to make geometric shapes, and then because of the angles or the length and whatnot, certain things just won't connect well. So she's
Right.
learning geometry like through that hands-on.
Exactly. Or
approach.
folding cloths. You have a
Yeah.
square cloth and you fold it in half.
Mhm.
And then you fold it in half again. You know, then all of a sudden fractions are like, oh, they can go back to the memory of doing that. So when they're learning fractions, it's not so foreign to them. So it's giving very rich experiences in learning.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, hands-on working with materials. It's a lot of, I'm not just feeding you information. I'm feeding you just enough to whet your appetite and to make you think and wonder so that when you discover it on your own, you're, wow, I figured that out at a very young age. So,
all right. Any other topics you got to plug for St. Albert's?
Yeah, I think our preschool program is the best program in this area. It's a complete Montessori approach to education. We also have Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is a Montessori approach to faith education, which really, again, instills in the child that they are created perfect in the eyes of God and that their relationship is with God. And I think that that pushes and permeates into the culture of the rest of the school. So our kids are learning their math facts. They are reciting poetry. They are, talking about, great things. They're hearing great stories. They're being read to and read to and read to. And they take delight in the stories of history, the stories of the Egyptians in kindergarten, the stories of ancient Greece in first grade. They have conversations in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So, this is the other thing about classical education. And you talk about ability, and same here at Tyburn. I've had kids at all across the spectrum of ability down to, learning disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's a question that parents get. Well, will my child get what they need? If my child's behind, will they get the services they need? The approach to education and the way children are learning, whether it's recitation or narration, it strengthens those skills that we hear so much about today, like speech impediments or motor skills. Learning handwriting strengthens motor skills, which then strengthens your cognitive ability. Narration strengthens processing, which we always hear all the time. Oh, she has a processing disorder.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
naturally, the approach to the academic approach will naturally strengthen those weaknesses. Now, there will be children that have a, dyslexia or anything like that. But then on the other side, the classrooms are enriched so much in content, in discussion, that the child who is excelled will not be bored.
Yeah.
Right? They will learn to love learning and to want more and to just be a sponge and absorb. And that's what I found here with my kids. Some of my kids went to college and they went on and studied, they went to honors programs and studied philosophy. And they said, what I got at Tyburn whet my appetite for that. Some of my other kids, did not, but they found strength in their natural skills because here they were honored and respected for what they could do.
Yeah. I know one of your kids who didn't go on to college, he still was like listening to Homer audiobooks while he worked.
Yes.
So he's still trying to continue the immersion into the classic.
Right.
You also have an open house March 20th, right?
We do. This Thursday, we have a curriculum night open house. So all of our classrooms are open. All of our books are on display. All of the math book, the history, the reading, so that you can come and actually not just see the school, but see what the children are learning, what our students are learning. So that's on Thursday from 5 to 7. And, but we have every Friday, we have open houses in our preschool, and, we take phone calls every day about people inquiring for next year. So that's good.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Next episode, our featured guest will be Miss Ashley Riley. She teaches chemistry, earth science, and math at Tyburn Academy, and we'll be exploring the relationship of faith and science and how those two topics are handled here together in a united way at Tyburn Academy. Thanks, Anne.
Mhm.